Hello, everybody on Fights of Friends. I am Mike of Fights of Friends, and I am here with Bellator top contender, former UFC world title challenger, Jon Fitch. Hey, thank you for doing this, man. I appreciate it.
Hey, no problem. Thanks for having me on.
So, how are things going? Things seem to be going good. You're coming off a great victory.
Yeah, I've been feeling good. Body's feeling healthy. Training's going great. Weight's coming down well. Everything's going according to plan.
Yeah, that was congratulations. I know it's been a little while, but congratulations on that great fight against Paul Daly. I mean, you just
Thank
completely
you.
dominated.
Yeah, it was a fun fight. It was great to get the chance to fight in front of my hometown crowd in San Jose. Um, I had a good performance. I wish Paul Daly would have tried a little harder to get up, but uh, I'll take the win, and I'm looking forward to taking that momentum with me forward to winning the welterweight title.
Yeah, well, I mean that makes it a little more exciting for the fans, I guess, when you try to get up. But I mean, that's a little easier said than done. You're pretty good at keeping people down over your career. I mean, I watch you. There's a lot of levels to that about how you keep guys down, how you step on their ankles. It's your game and everything I see in wrestling MMA has evolved so much from just like the single and double leg. It's like now, you're grabbing the inside of the angle and flipping it up. You're grabbing the inside of the foot. I mean, there's so
Yep.
many little intricate details.
Yeah, especially against the cage, against the fence. There's all kinds of ways to use leverage in different ways. There's ways to take away the guy's athleticism. There's ways to bring the guy's knees together. All kinds of different stuff that isn't quite traditional wrestling, but it's still wrestling, and it's just a hybrid thing because jiu-jitsu and wrestling don't have walls, but the MMA game does.
Yeah, definitely. We've been talking about that some with how that translates from wrestlers coming over, and we were talking about it the other night because they had the ONE FC. They had that inside of a ring, and that was a different game. I know one of your guys' champions from Bellator went over to Ryzen here recently, and talked a little bit about the differences there in the ring.
Mm-hmm.
That
And then some of them they have the ring with the fence, like the netting on the bottom rope to the bottom, so you don't fall out underneath. Like it's even that adds another layer to what's going on.
Yeah, to me, it's kind of like a little different sport. Like you got to learn a little bit
Mm-hmm.
different every time you do something. But let's talk a little bit. You had a lengthy career in the UFC. You want to talk a little bit about maybe differences between the UFC and Bellator, or transitions in that time between?
Well, there was a metamorphosis between early UFC to what it is now, and I don't even fully know what it is now because I haven't gone to shows, I haven't been backstage, but I do know from the time that I signed with them, something like 2005 to 2013, it changed a great deal. I think part of that was the competition changed as far as other promoters who were actually competing with the UFC, where nobody's really competing with the UFC at all anymore. It's a take it or leave it type scenario. Back in the day, you still had Pride and K1, and you had other viable options to where you could go and make money, and the titles of those organizations were sought as equals, if not better, than the UFC's. But now the UFC bought up all the other titles; they bought up the top contracts. So now, really, in order for you to make the most amount of money, the way for you to get the most amount of respect in the sport is to fight for the UFC title. So it kind of allows them to have a take it or leave it type of attitude with their contracts and the agreements and negotiations and stuff they have.
Yeah, something that I really liked that you did in your career that I thought was maybe equal to just about anything you did inside the cage. And I talked to Randy about this as well. You were an advocate for the rights of fighters. I know you had you stood up when the UFC wanted to take there was a deal with the UFC video game where they wanted everybody to sign over their absolute rights. You want to explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, 2008, after I had fought GSP, I had a fight of the night bonus. I was at my peak popularity at the time, and they fired me because I didn't want to sign a video game agreement and a merchandising agreement that gave them rights to my image and likeness for no money for eternity. And I thought that was not a good deal. I wasn't a business major in school, but I had enough business sense to know that wasn't okay. Who knew where technology was going to go in the future? I played a lot of video games. Who knows? It could have been affordable enough where I was able to produce my own video game. So why would I want to give up my image and likeness? Why would I want to give them that type of power? There was also stuff in the merchandising agreement that said if I died, my family would have no rights to the money made off of my image and likeness and sales of things that I was involved in. That seemed completely absurd to me. So I refused to sign that contract, and they fired me. And in order to get me to sign back with them, they kind of blackmailed me and threatened to fire the rest of my teammates and everybody associated with my management company, Zeke Entertainment, who my managers are. And it put me in a bad spot where I believed them that they were going to do that, so I kind of had to re-sign with them instead of going and jumping ship over to Strikeforce.
Yeah, I remember it. I mean, I'm sure I followed it closer than most fans and thing at the time, and I remember thinking, man, I was really happy you were standing up for that. I don't know if there was anybody else that was standing up. Yours was the name that was out there publicly.
They specifically targeted me because I was just coming off of a big fight, and a lot of people knew who I was, and there was a situation where there was other fighters and other people who were trying not to sign also, but they weren't vocal about it, and I wasn't vocal about it either. I was trying to talk to them directly. I was trying to get a 20-year cutoff. I wasn't even asking for money. I was just like, okay, well, you can have this, but after 20 years, you should give me all my stuff back. They are the ones who went public with it. They're the ones who fired me and went public with it. And they deliberately did this to scare everybody else into signing the contracts. And it worked because everybody's like, oh, well, they're going to do this to Jon Fitch, who just had this amazing fight, who went 8-0, lost one fight to the champion, had a fight of the night performance. If they're going to do this to him, what are they going to do to me? So they knew what they were doing. They did it on purpose. They did it to scare everyone. It was a 24-hour period of time for us to resolve that issue. It never needed to go public. The press never needed to know about it, but it did because they wanted it to.
Yeah, which, I mean, I guess they were kind of trying to play stronghold or whatever there, but I thought it just made them look completely horrible. I don't see how that makes the fighters look bad at all.
Made them look bad, but it worked. It worked. They ended up getting the majority of the people to sign the video game agreement and the merchandising agreement.
If you don't mind me asking, I know there's not a Bellator video game, I don't think, and merchandise sales maybe aren't the same like you talked about. UFC is kind of a monopoly. But what kind of deals does Bellator and Scott Coker work out with you guys?
Well, I mean, for one, they're paying a much higher percentage of the revenues, so they're taking better care of the fighters. But I mean, they're the number 2 organization in the world, and they make 144 times less the money than the UFC does. There is no competitor to the UFC. UFC is number 1 by a very long shot. And everybody else is kind of a far distant number 2 or fighting for number 2 position. There's not really a chance for any other organization to rise up and challenge them because they've solidified their belt as the number 1 belt. And for the fighter's perspective, if you want to be considered a top tier prize fighter, you have to fight for the top belt. Their monopoly lies in controlling the title and controlling the ranks.
Yeah, that is, I mean, I like a lot of the fighters there. I like watching their show, obviously. I like watching Bellator's show. I like parts about Bellator better, honestly. I like parts about different ones. I wish that
I
Bellator
feel
had a
like
better way.
Bellator is doing a more of a merit-based approach, I think, and you really need that. I think to maintain the fan base, you really need that because um, the fighters end up building themselves through their performances rather than the promoter pushing certain guys because they're making more money off of them. The promoter pushes certain guys because they're making more money off of them, and then they lose all of a sudden, and it throws people off. They don't understand it, and then people kind of step away from the sport. There's a lot of pro wrestling fans that are also fans with with the UFC though, because they're used to, you know, that type of dynamic. They're used to the big talking on the mics and the big show outside of the actual fight. Um, but it's just not a sport. It's not run like a sport. You got to have some meritocracy. You can have the big fights that are fun, the popular fights that don't necessarily make sense. The rankings may not be right there, but you need meritocracy still in the sport in order for it to really be successful, in order to have younger stars build up into big stars.
Yeah, I've always been a guy that says, yeah, you can have fun fights. Not everything has to be for the title, but just make it clear that this is not a contendership. As we've had popular fighters. You had like Vanderlei Silva and Chuck Liddell at the end of their careers, even when they weren't champions. They were big draws.
If there's some real solid beef and real good shenanigans outside of the fight around a champion and somebody who's a lesser fighter, and the guy's number 5, number 6, number 7, whatever, that's fine. You can have that every once in a while, but it shouldn't be every single fight. Every single fight shouldn't be a popularity type contest. It is disrespectful to the fighters who put in the work and who have earned a title shot, and it's not fair to the fans because they don't get to really see the guys climb the ranks and get to fight for the titles and get title shots that they've earned. They have this approach where you're lucky to be awarded the opportunity to fight for a title, rather than the fighter gets to earn the right to fight for the title. You earn it through winning. You aren't granted the opportunity. The sickness is in full display when someone like George St. Pierre has to get down on his hands and knees and beg for a title shot. That's just a gross symptom of what's going on.
Yeah, and that was a guy that, they had promoted him in the past. He was, he had the wins. Just talk a little bit about your climb to the top. You went through a murderer's row, undefeated, 8-0 at the time. You definitely made yourself. Nobody else could put a claim to that number 1 contender spot. I remember at the time I'm thinking, this guy's just walking through everybody. So you were definitely a guy that I enjoyed watching.
And it's happened a number of times since then. Khabib had to win 9 fights before he got a title shot. Yeah, it's just
Tony Ferguson. I believe he's like 12 or 13.
So you're not granted the opportunity to fight for a title. You earn the right to play for a title or fight for a title. The Patriots, New England Patriots, they weren't granted the opportunity to play in the Super Bowl. They won the right to play in the Super Bowl by winning games. That's what happens in this sport. You earn it through winning. And as long as that's not what's going on, it's not a sport.
That is what I like about the tournament that you guys are doing right now. Because if you beat Rory McDonald, if you beat the guys, it doesn't matter what happens. When you win the tournament, you win the tournament. It doesn't matter how you're promoted or what you say on the mic. So I do like that kind of thing. I like what the PFL is doing. I like that you guys are doing more tournaments like that. As you say, I like that you guys are able to have your own sponsors too. I don't think that Reebok deal, it doesn't seem like that does much of anything for the fighters.
It's demonstrated from Monsanto. Them treating fighters like workers when they're not workers. They're independent contractors. They're businesses. They're each individual businesses, privately owned businesses. You wouldn't see that in any other industry where two businesses that work together, one gets to dictate whether another one works or not, or another gets to do business. It's just not supposed to be there, especially in a sport and competition. If there's restraint in the competition that doesn't need to be there, it needs to be removed.
Yeah, so something that really always bothered me with the way the UFC did contracts is like, you would sign 6, 7 fight contract, and if you
Mm-hmm.
decided you wanted to go somewhere else 5 fights in, that wasn't going to happen. You retired,
Mm-hmm.
nothing in the world you can do. But they can get rid of
If you
you.
retired, they would freeze your contract. If you get injured, they would freeze your contract, and they would often freeze contracts without telling the guys. You turn down a fight because you either don't want the fight, or which is your right as an individually owned business. You can choose not to work if you want to. Um, they would freeze your contract, so your contract would get extended.
Yeah, it has always seemed like a strange one way deal with them. I've been in business. I've been in business. With places. Other than YouTube and other places, I've never had anybody try to take control of me like that. And I mean, you
Mm-hmm.
guys, you're the stars. I'm not a star. I've never been, involved in
And,
anything
and,
where more
and,
than a few
and
thousand people cared about me.
yeah, that's one of the things too. Is people keep uh, we're the labor, but we're not really laborers. We're actually the product. It's not the same as a worker on the factory floor who's just doing labor. We're doing labor, but we're also the product. We should have some agency. We should get to keep our titles. We should get to keep our ranks, regardless of what promoter we work for, or not work for, work with.
Yeah. How do you think at this point? I know Bellator's in a little different situation, but Randy talked about this. He's for a labor union in the UFC to see them get their
For
just due.
an association, a fighters association, labor union would be under um, one promoter. We can't do that. You can't have the ability to sue for collusion of repression of wages. Uh, if there's only one owner, you can't collude with yourself. So that only works with a league. We don't have leagues. We don't have multiple organizations working together under one sanctioning body.
Yeah, I know. Randy Couture talked about the All E Act. I don't know. I didn't really quite understand how that could affect UFC if it was enacted, but I know boxing, is very
Well,
splintered.
with the Ali Act, you have independent rankings, so the promoter has nothing to do with rankings, and you have independent belts, so the promoter won't have any control over the belt whatsoever. The promoter won't get to choose who gets to fight for the title. That would go to a sanctioning body. With the boxing, we have sanctioning bodies. Those were created in the 1800s, and well, actually, the titles were taken away from promoters in the 1800s. The sanctioning body license was created by New York in 1925, and we've had sanctioning bodies in boxing since 1925. Is corrupt as boxing has been, promoters have not been able to control the title since the 1800s. Don King, as dirty and as despicable as he was as a promoter, he never had control of the title. Dana White is way worse than Don King ever was.
Yeah, as far as that is concerned, because of the amount of power that he has, I would agree with that. I would not to pick on the guy, but you know, uh, I think Don King probably had a little bit of push getting John Ruiz in there back in the day for a few heavyweight title bouts. I mean,
Well, yeah, he was able to manipulate the sanctioning bodies and stuff through corrupt behavior, but that corrupt behavior was suable. You could sue and take action against them, um, and you can't do that with the UFC because they just outright own the title already. They don't have to pay anybody off.
yeah, and that's a good point. And Don, even as you say, like Don King, he has lost several lawsuits to several fighters. I know that
Yep.
he actually most people probably don't know he actually was going to lose a lawsuit with Mike Tyson that Mike Tyson talked about. They ended up coming to a settlement that it was like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, yeah, there was some
Yeah, the
mix
problem
up.
with boxing is they a lot of times they don't know the law, they don't know the rules, and they don't have the money to sue these promoters. So A lot of the corruption they get away with the corruption, but the corrupt acts are individual acts that can be actioned. In MMA, the baseline structure of the sport is corrupt. So everything that happens afterwards is part corrupt.
Yeah, to me, like they say they're a private business, and like boxing, those little entities kind of,
You can't own a sport.
yeah, kind of speak like private businesses. I think of the UFC almost as like I think about the government. They write their own rules, they write their own laws. That
A communist government. I've made this example before. They take all the wages, they redistribute it as they see fit. They keep the lion's share. Yeah, it's a communist. They're Stalin.
Yeah, and that's been one of the most important things to me on this show is to always fight for fighter safety and fighter advocacy. Mm-hmm. I don't expect Dana White to ever come on my show. I mean, I'm not saying I hate the guy or anything, but I want people to be treated fairly.
Well, he wouldn't go on your show because you'd probably ask real questions. You would ask stinging questions and you'd ask follow-up questions that he wouldn't be able to answer without yelling or insulting you. A lot of the press corps is just PR people. They're not really journalists.
I have noticed that. I have noticed the journalists, if they have any controversial question, especially during this last thing with John Jones and Dana White. I mean, they were mocking those reporters. Maybe there was the promoters that.
I mean, what about the stuff that's coming out right now? It could totally not be true, but there's stuff coming out about Conor McGregor. I've talked about this on my live streams, and there's other people who've covered this who are not related to MMA, but he's under investigation for a sexual assault that happened in December.
Yeah.
And nobody has brought it up. Really? Why is that? I mean, it seems newsworthy that somebody should at least ask a question and maybe get some clarification. Hopefully he can come out and defend himself in some way. But nobody's even asked a question. It's only come out now. It's only being reported about now. How is that possible?
Yeah, that's absolutely crazy. And I mean, I had somebody send me, and I never did share it because I couldn't substantiate at the time, but from back in January, somebody had sent me some documents, some police documents. Somebody that I know is actually, they live in Spain. I don't know if they were in Ireland, but it basically broke everything down as to what it was. And I'm like, man, he was really upset with me that I wouldn't report on it. I'm like, man, I just can't prove it.
I think there's a YouTube channel called We Are Change, and I believe that Jason Burmas was on that, and he covered it. I tweeted it out on my Twitter profile, so if anybody's interested, they could probably find it on that. But I mean, it's interesting. It could be 100% not true. It should be taken with a grain of salt. You don't want to just roast somebody for an accusation. But at the same time, why would nobody even talk about it? Especially in this day and age with the Me Too movement stuff going on. It seems like anybody who is slightly accused gets thrown into the fire. But nothing's even happened. This happened in December. It wasn't a recent thing. Hopefully it's not true. Hopefully he's not that kind of a person. But my critique is not of him. My critique is of the press. What is the press doing?
Yeah, they were very quick to jump on Nate Diaz, which, I mean, that didn't, they looked at the evidence there and said there was not enough evidence to go to court on it at all.
Nate Diaz is a perpetual whipping boy, too. That guy's been abused by the media more than any fighter I can think of. They abuse him to get clicks, to sell their stories, and to make money. And it's wrong. It's just, it kind of makes me sick the way they treat Nick. Yeah.
You know those negotiations as well as anybody in the back, and you always get.
There aren't any negotiations. It's a take it or leave it. It's mostly take it or leave it. They offer a contract. If you say no, like, you're done. Like, okay, it's over. Like, take this, or there's no fights. There's no money for you. Like, there's not really much wiggle room. The managers aren't really managers. They're mostly brokers. Like, they know the deal. They know that they're not going to be able to give much pushback for more money, because if they do, they're going to screw the rest of their clientele up. You know, if they got 30 guys under contract, they're not going to fight hard. They're not going to go to the mattresses for you on a contract when they know that it's just going to screw the rest of their fighters over.
But the one thing, I mean, I guess maybe I kind of understand this. I don't understand it in a way. I mean, the UFC, obviously Dana White is about money. He's pushed Conor McGregor. Speaking of Diaz, since you brought up Nick Diaz and Nate Diaz, I feel they're two of the most marketable guys out there, and he can't get those guys in the cage. That's a complete fail as a promoter, you know, in my mind.
Because they've seen the light. They understand. Like, once you see the dead bodies, there's no going back. They understand their value. They understand what kind of money they're making these people. Like, why are they going to go and risk injury, brain damage, embarrassment, you know, the ridicule for pennies on the dollar? If they were making real money, if they're making a real percentage, if they're making 50 to 80% like boxers do, then you probably get a deal. You probably get them in the cage. But you're talking, the UFC pays out about 13%. You know, let's be really favorable and say they give out 20%. Really, they're going to pay 20% of the revenue to these guys who are getting CTE, brain damage, and other physical, disfigurements for putting on the show. And not only that, the promoters are going to badmouth them and make fun of them and call them pussies or something. I mean, why? Like, they've woken up. They're smart. They understand that they're worth a lot more than they're being paid.
Yeah, I'm happy to see that. I wish that there was, you know, somebody else advocating for them, that it wasn't, like you said, so much more kind of a communist system.
It wasn't just me out here screaming into the wind. Yeah, I wish that was the case too. I wish we had some support from the press and a lot of other people. It's slowly happening a little bit, but mostly it's fans who are starting to feel guilty by, you know, realizing that these guys are putting on these shows, getting beat up, getting hurt, walking away from the sport with serious physical ailments, and they're being exploited and not paid. So I think there's a lot of people who are getting a guilty conscience about enjoying this destruction of these people they like.
And I've actually had that issue. That's why, I mean, I pay for every pay-per-view, because I've had people come to me, oh, I can get you this side, I can get you this or whatever. And I'm like, how can I come on the mic and complain about fighter pay and I'm not putting my amount out there? They're like, well, they're not giving it to the fighters anyways. But I'm like, well, if they don't make anything, then nobody's getting paid. So, I mean, that's just my thing. I always pay, you know, for every pay-per-view, every subscription and everything. I wish I had, you know, I had more control over how much went to the fighter. Like you said, 13%. Randy was right there with you. He said about 15.
Really concerned. The best thing they can do is call the representatives and support the Ali Act, the Ali Expansion Act, to support the Fighters Association. These are the organizations. These are the things that are going to make change. You know, stealing the pay-per-view isn't going to do anything. Complaining online isn't going to do anything. You need to get a hold of your representatives, and you need to support the Fighters Association.
So if you were to talk somebody outside, like I came to you and said, what's the first step, Jon Fitch, you know, for our community and fans to do to help fighters? Who would we even write, or who would we talk to?
Well, one of the first things you can do is go to the Mixed Martial Arts Fighters Association website. Go to the Facebook fan page. You can read literature, read about what's going on, read about why things are broken, and then support our lobbying efforts to pass the Muhammad Ali Expansion Act, where we want to expand the Muhammad Ali Act to from not just boxing, but to cover MMA and all other combat sports. We want to protect all combat sports athletes and allow them to have agency and allow them to be independent contractors and earn market value pay.
Yeah, because you don't, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure you've already answered this though, but like if you were a singer, if you were a movie star or whatever, I mean, these guys, they're getting residuals from their songs and everything for life. Yeah, I believe you'll never receive another residual from the UFC.
For your fights, no matter how many times they're showed on their Fight Pass. In fact, you can't even get permission to use your fight footage for self-promotion reasons.
That's absolutely crazy. And one of the things that blew my mind is I was talking to a fighter, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm not watching this pay per view because I don't want to pay for it." I'm like, "What? You're in the UFC? You have to pay for the pay per view?" He was like, "Yeah, I have to pay for the pay per
I
view."
don't even know if they really give out tickets. They used to guarantee tickets to the shows. I don't know if they even really do that anymore. And the seats they give out, they may be like the nosebleed cheap seats.
Yeah, unless you're, I mean, I love the guy. I love the guy's show, but it's like Joe Rogan. They give him, the Fight Pass clips right away. Of course, a smaller guy like me, they're not going to give it to me, but he's going to say some favorable things about them on his show too. It's one of the only critiques I have of him. I feel he is pretty straight down the middle and fair about everything until you start talking about the UFC, and it's like, I kind of wish you just wouldn't talk about that anymore.
Yeah, well, he just doesn't say certain things. He won't talk about certain things. That's for sure.
Yeah, and I know he's in a tough position. I'm not trying to beat up Joe Rogan. I think he's a good guy, for the most part. But yeah, he also at the same time, like I say, he's an employee of the UFC, and for younger people like myself, they're well, I mean, I'm 40 years old. I guess not younger, but I mean 20. Anybody 25, basically to 45, 50. Podcasts are so huge right now. He's literally one of the number one influencers in the country, if not the world, right now. His influence is so strong.
Yep.
I wish he would stand up for fighters' rights or for fighters' pay. It would be great to have somebody like him.
Yeah, I gave up on that a long time ago. Joe's great, but he's a perpetual fence sitter. He doesn't want to ostracize or push out any potential guests or points of view because he wants to make sure everybody can come in. So there's a lot of times he doesn't take hard stances on issues because he doesn't want to scare off any group of people. He wants to keep the dialogue going around things. So I understand on the level. I understand.
Yeah, the one time I was really the most upset is the thing, with John Jones, with whatever picograms or whatever. It's like the more you try to tell us how small this amount is, the more it makes you look guilty that you're trying to cover something up.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm looking at what's his.
For sure.
Yeah,
and then you have the whole TJ Dillashaw thing. Like there's a lot of mystery around that situation too. Like they didn't. I don't know if they've said anything yet, but they didn't really say what he was busted for and what amounts was that. I'm willing to bet that maybe he had lower levels than John Jones did, so they're not saying anything because they don't want to shine a light on the obvious conflict of interest or preferential treatment to certain people.
That's a good point. My first inclination with TJ Dillashaw was dropping down to 125. I'm thinking, gotta be diuretics, because if you're taking anything else, you would think it would be hard to get down to that weight, but I don't know a whole lot about those kinds of things.
Yeah.
So I mean, I guess we could speculate all day until they actually come out with what it is. But let's talk about you moving forward, though, in this tournament. Your opponent, Rory McDonald, that is an incredible matchup. I mean, you guys are both two very accomplished, probably two of the most accomplished welterweights in the history of the sport. I mean, what does it mean to get in there with a guy like that,
No, it's great. It's ever since getting released with the UFC, it's been a struggle. I've had a number of issues pop up outside of the cage that have made training and focusing and fighting difficult. And it's great that the last couple of years I've had a little more focus, a little more clarity, a little bit more ability to put myself 100% into training and into the fights, and to be able to get through that adversity and find myself back in title contention again. It's just great. It's just don't give up. Don't ever give up, guys.
Yeah, I was very glad to see, when you were signed and, you were right in there with a big guy when you were in there with Paul Daly. I'm like, oh, this is a good matchup for him. I'm glad to see him coming back because I mean, you're in great shape for your age, but you're 41 years old, I believe, correct?
Unfortunately, that is true. I don't believe in time though. I don't believe in time. It's just one. It's just one experience.
Well, you don't fight like you're 41. I know you take care of yourself. I know I've watched you on your YouTube channel a little bit, talk about nutrition, talk about your
Hmm.
workouts, and I've heard different guys talk about anti-aging. Diego Sanchez recently, some of the things that he's doing, and obviously, I'm guessing you don't let yourself get too far out of shape in between fights.
No, it's too hard to. You've got to stay on it all the time. I shift. What my workouts are. I do things differently. I'll go and just do some straight jujitsu, but I think a big thing that's helped a lot is lifting, consistency with lifting. And I don't lift like a bodybuilder or a physique model or whatever. I'm lifting like a martial artist. I'm lifting almost every day, but very limited with the number of exercises I do. I'm not trying to max out. I'm not trying to do crazy weight. I just want to be consistent with my weights, and I think that helps a lot. I think that plus nutrition is a big key to maintaining your youth, fighting against gravity, fighting against time, and I'm pretty convinced that I've found a good way to stay healthy, stay young, and keeping your mind young is an important part of it too.
Yeah, I'm sure. Like when people, I don't like to celebrate birthdays. Like when people tell, I'm like, don't tell
Yeah,
me
I
that. What are
know.
you
Yeah,
celebrating me one year closer to death? I'm like, thanks for that. I just turned 40. That's one of those years. It's like, just can you just act like that's not happening right now? But
well, I mean, we've made such great advances in health and nutrition, you know, uh, that 40 today isn't what it used to be. I remember being a kid and my parents having their 40th birthdays, and it definitely was a different time. And I think people are just more, well, some people are more health conscious. They're eating better, putting the right things in their body, and then they're doing the exercise stuff that they need to. And it's not enough to just be doing physical growth. You need the mental growth too. You need to be challenging yourself mentally as you get older. You need to be trying to acquire new skills. Try to learn a new language. Try to learn an instrument later in life. You should pick one thing every year to learn and get better at, regardless what it is. I think the more you're learning new stuff, the more your brain is staying young and active.
yeah, I do see you doing stuff outside of the cage, talking about it some on your YouTube channel that I've watched, and also, of course, it's important for fighters to set themselves up when they leave this sport because obviously the UFC isn't setting these guys up. A lot of other people,
Hmm.
they don't have the pensions like the NFL and NBA and things do.
Well, even your regular person, you need to have your job and you need to have a side gig. You need to try to have multiple streams of revenue coming in because you could get sick, you get hurt, or your industry could change and be automated, and you're out of a job now. You could be replaced with artificial intelligence. You could be replaced with a robot. In the next 5 to 20 years. So you need to be growing all the time because your job might not be there in 5 years. It might not be there in 10 years. So what are you going to do when that happens, when that transition happens? If you're not constantly learning new skills, if you're not adding to, make a term as talent stack, if you're not adding to your talent stack, you're setting yourself up for failure.
I completely agree with that. I have keep about 6 7 streams of revenue, and then my wife has a few more on top of that, and I've
It's good.
well, I wasn't very smart, but I had some mentors that were very smart and kind of pounded that into me. So, but looks like your picture's frozen for a second. Let me see if I can hear you here though. You there, John? All right, we're gonna reconnect here real quick. I'm gonna call him right back here and see what Hopefully they didn't have something die over on that side. I apologize here for the break. It looks like possibly he has a dead battery or something. I'm going to cut the recording and then pick it back up. And if we're able to reach him, if not, really appreciate his time.